Have you ever wondered who actually chooses the most powerful man in the spiritual world? Do you think it's the work of the Holy Spirit or human ambition? Behind insurmountable walls, in a silence thicker than history itself, a battle is brewing that you won't see on any newscast. Who manipulates the votes? Who whispers in the darkness? Who carries the weight of a millennia-old empire on their shoulders? Today, you will cross the final frontier. Today, you will see what others should never see. Welcome to the Conclave. In the heart of Rome, where the marbles breathe the history of fallen empires and immortal creeds, where bronze bells ring out over the blood of forgotten generations, rises Vatican City, a tiny kingdom among nations, but a colossus among souls. For centuries, within its thick walls, one of humanity's most mysterious and sacred acts has been decided: the election of the Supreme Pontiff, the Vicar of Christ on earth. However, what for pilgrims and faithful appears shrouded in incense, heavenly choirs, and white smoke has often been covered in shadows that not even the midday sun can dispel. Because the papal conclave, that solemn confinement of cardinals in the Sistine Chapel, is also a stage where human power, with all its miseries, ambitions, and pacts, has found fertile ground to flourish under masks of sanctity. The word conclave comes from the Latin cum clave, meaning under lock and key, and the term is not merely symbolic. Beginning in the 13th century, following the interminable power vacuum left by the death of Pope Clement IV and a long interregnum that lasted almost 3 years, the custom was instituted of literally locking the cardinal electors up until they reached a consensus. But where the door closes, whispers open. History records that during the first great conclave in Viterbo, the people, tired of waiting, went so far as to tear down the roof of the place where the cardinals were staying, exposing them to the elements to force a decision. External pressure, hunger, and fear of popular fury were the first dark ingredients in a recipe that would never cease to be repeated. Over the centuries, the conclave evolved, but it never ceased to be a spiritual and political battleground. World powers, noble families, empires in formation or decline, always sought their share of the Pope's election. During the Renaissance, conclaves were stained with gold and blood. Bribes were rife, and cardinals, many of them more princes than priests, sold their votes to the highest bidder. The conclave that elected Rodrigo Borgia as Pope Alexander VI is famous for its open influence peddling. Banquets, promises of wealthy dioceses, and purses full of florins changed hands in the Vatican chambers, while, in the Sistine Chapel, Perugino's freshly painted frescoes watched the transaction silently. But time did not purify the process, it only refined its methods. In later centuries, the Catholic monarchs of Spain, France, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire exercised the so-called right of exclusion, a veto they could impose on unwanted candidates. This unwritten but recognized power allowed temporal thrones to bend the will of the cardinals to their convenience. In 1903, during the conclave following the death of Leo XII, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria exercised this veto for the last time against Cardinal Rampolla, considered too progressive, changing the course of history by forcing the election of Giuseppe Sardo, who would become Pius de Summis. After the formal abolition of this right, one might think that external influence would wither away, but the modern world found more subtle ways to intervene. In the 20th and 21st centuries, while cardinals were locked away under strict surveillance, embassies, the media, and even secret services wove networks of information and influence. During the Cold War, the CIA carefully monitored papal elections, viewing the Vatican as a key player in countering communist expansion in Europe and Latin America. Declassified documents reveal that Washington considered the election of an anti-communist pope a strategic triumph, and it is no coincidence that John Paul II, the charismatic Polish leader Karol Wojtyla, emerged in 1978 as a decisive figure in the fall of the Soviet bloc. Within the conclave, the pressures are no less intense. Although the cardinals swear to vote according to their consciences enlightened by God, the reality, according to multiple historical testimonies, reveals a network of alliances, promises, and political calculations. There are no official campaigns, but there are discrete movements of support. In the hours before the confinement, meetings are held, known in Vatican jargon as sympathy dinners, where the field is tested, support is gauged, and strategies are outlined. The election of Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, in 2005 was largely driven by a conservative bloc that had worked intensively since the death of John Paul II to consolidate its candidacy, aware that a progressive pope could blur decades of restorative doctrine. More recently, the 2013 Conclave, following the surprise resignation of Benedict XVI, revealed a new facet of the drama: the existence of the so-called Team Bergoglio, a group of reformist cardinals who promoted the election of the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. George Mario Bergoglio was documented by Austin Ivory in his book, The Great Reformer. According to his account, cardinals such as Cormac Murphy O'Connor, Walter Casper, and Karl Lehmann conducted discreet consultations and maneuvers to consolidate support for Bergoglio, who was seen as the only one capable of leading the internal reform necessary to clean up the corruption and abuse scandals that undermined the Church's credibility. There was no fraud nor vote buying in the traditional sense, but organization, strategy, and internal lobbying made a crucial difference. Although prior pacts are formally prohibited, it is almost impossible to prevent human beings, even those dressed in cardinal's purple, from seeking to influence their peers to achieve what they believe or desire to be the greater good. And sometimes, that greater good mysteriously aligns with political, economic, or personal interests. The absolute secrecy surrounding the conclave is intended to protect the freedom of the electors. No one is allowed to communicate with the outside world, and extreme measures are taken. Electronic signal jammers, microphone detectors, physical inspections of all employees, Swiss guards stationed at strategic points. Even so, there have been leaks. Renowned Vatican journalists, such as Marco Politi and John L. Allen Jr., have reported details of conclaves based on discreet testimony afterward, or on carefully calculated leaks by certain groups interested in shaping public perception of the new pontiff. The cardinals enter the Sistine Chapel as individuals, but the votes soon group them into currents: progressives, conservatives, moderates, pragmatists, idealists. Each represents more than their own vote. They represent networks of interests, worldviews, hopes for change, or fears of chaos. The election is not an angelic act, but the result of a collision of human forces imbued with the aroma of the sacred. The first vote is usually exploratory. Rarely does a candidate obtain the necessary 2/3 majority in that first ballot. It's a thermometer for measuring trends. Then the movements begin. Tacit resignations, redistributed support, blocking strategies. Sometimes, a strong candidate is systematically eroded by attrition tactics. The spread of rumors, appeals to fear. If we elect X, we'll lose the faithful in such and such a region. The exaltation of compromise alternatives. In the halls of Santa Marta, where the cardinals sleep during the conclave, the nights are short but charged. Looks, gestures, and measured words open or close paths. Each cardinal carries in his mind not only the image of Christ, but also the voices of his invisible constituents, his countries, his religious orders, his congregations. History shows that at this intersection of loyalties, the moral compass sometimes trembles. During the 1978 conclave that elected John Paul II, it is said that intense pressure from Italian sectors to keep the papacy in Italian hands was decisive in splitting the votes among several local candidates, thus opening the door to a Polish outsider. And when Bergoglio emerged in 2013, many acknowledged that he was not everyone's first choice, but he was the possible consensus among exhausted factions. But the darkest secrets of the conclave are not always found within, but rather in what happens around it. Financial scandals, such as the 2012 Vatican scandal, where secret documents revealed infighting, corruption, and favoritism, profoundly affected public perception, and although not officially acknowledged, influenced the decisions of many cardinals who understood the need to elect a reformer. There is also the pressure of prophecies. The famous prophecy of St. Malachi, a medieval document of dubious authenticity, assigns mysterious mottos to each pope until a supposed last pope, nicknamed Peter the Roman. Although the Church does not officially recognize these prophecies, their shadow looms over every conclave, fueling the imagination of the faithful and prelates. The election of a pope at the end of time is a specter that haunts even the most rational minds. And in that atmosphere where incense fails to completely dissipate the smell of ancient dust and latent conspiracy, where the creak of a sandal can seem to signal a change of alliances, the cardinals vote once, twice, 3 times, while outside, the world holds its breath. St. Peter's Square, with its columns embracing the crowd like the arms of a stern mother, awaits the smoke, the color, the signal that will announce that a new successor to Peter has been elected. But for those inside, the signal will not be merely spiritual. It will also be the fruit of 1,000 calculations of silent agreements, of personal renunciations, and, at times, of painful betrayals. There were conclaves where tension reached unimaginable extremes. It is said that in 1268, in Viterbo, the exasperating delay in the election led to drastic measures. Not only was their roof removed to force a decision, but their diet was reduced to bread and water. Physical and psychological pressure took effect where prayers had failed. This tradition of squeezing the electors, while not expressed so brutally today, lives on in another form. Moral pressure, the urgency of avoiding a scandal of excessive prolongation, the awareness of the global gaze fixed on their backs. In 2005, following the death of John Paul II, Vatican analysts highlighted the polarization between curialists, who favored a papacy of continuity, and pastoralists, who desired an opening toward the peripheries. Joseph Ratzinger, as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, was seen as the candidate of the ecclesiastical establishment. His election in just 2 days of conclave demonstrated the effectiveness of a machinery that had patiently prepared the ground. There was no need for gold bribes as in the Renaissance, but there was a web of loyalties woven over decades of appointments, favors granted and returned. Benedict XVI, a profound and reserved theologian, was chosen in part because many cardinals, while perhaps more sympathetic to more pastoral figures, feared a doctrinal vacuum in times of crisis. The logic of fear of chaos weighed as heavily as spiritual inspiration. Indeed, in every conclave, the Holy Spirit blows, but as one old cardinal confessed, sometimes he blows very slowly, and you have to help him a little. The 2013 conclave, on the other hand, was the product of an unprecedented earthquake, the papal resignation. Benedict XVI, burdened by intrigue, financial scandals, and his own physical frailty, opted for a gesture of radical humility that unsettled the Roman Curia. The throne of Peter was vacated not by death, but by abdication, something unseen in centuries. The election of his successor took place under the weight of this anomaly. Tiempo Bergoglio knew how to channel the desire for change, renewal, and cleansing. In those days of March, informal gatherings, sympathy dinners, multiplied. These were not opulent banquets like those of the Renaissance, but crucial alliances were forged in the discreet dining rooms of Roman religious houses. Discussions centered on the need for a pope from the global south, one capable of understanding poverty, migration, and new social challenges. The importance of a figure not too closely associated with the curial apparatus, which many considered complicit in the scandals, was emphasized. George Mario Bergoglio's rise was meteoric once the first votes began to sound the ground. By the third ballot, his name was already resonating with unstoppable force. According to subsequent testimony from some cardinals, the election was perceived by many as a liberation, not so much out of ideological conviction, but as a response to the urgent need to restore the Church's credibility in an increasingly skeptical and secularized world. The election of a pope, however, is not the end of the drama. It is merely its transformation, because the pontiff, once dressed in white, becomes the focus of new tensions, new pressures, new attempts at manipulation. The secrets of the conclave live on in his decisions, in the appointments he makes, in the reforms he undertakes or hinders. Every new bishop appointed, every prefect of a congregation elected, every cardinal created, is in part an echo of the pacts, promises, and renunciations sealed in the days of sacred confinement. Furthermore, the shadow of prophecy continues to loom. The famous prophecy of Saint Malachi, although officially discredited, hangs like a specter over every election. Some faithful, and not a few prelates, wondered if Francis would be the last pope, the Roman Peter, who, according to the text...
Dear time travelers and lovers of eternal stories, I am Messalina, and I have a little secret for you. The gods reward those who support their favorite storytellers. If this corner of myths, legends, and mysteries has sparked your curiosity, I invite you to follow my channel and activate the bell so you don't miss a single trip through time. And if you want this legacy to grow and continue exploring together the greatness of Rome and beyond, you can leave your offering on PayPal or Patreon. The links are in the description, because even the gods know that any help allows for the forging of eternal works. I promise you that if you do, the gods will bring you peace, prosperity, and perhaps a little touch of fate. Your gestures do not go unnoticed, and my gratitude will be as infinite as time itself.
Total transparency of the conclave is a chimera. Despite all the security measures, all the prohibitions, human beings, with their innate need to communicate, to influence, to negotiate, always find loopholes. Subsequent leaks, however discreet, allow us to partially reconstruct the internal games. And what emerges is a profoundly human portrait. Elderly men, sometimes ill, sometimes cunning, struggling with their consciences, their emotions, their loyalties, to make a decision they know will change history. The dark secrets of the conclave are not, then, necessarily crimes or infernal conspiracies. They are the gray areas of the human soul, amplified by the enormity of the responsibility they bear. They are the doubts, the fears, the secret hopes. They are the awareness that although the choice is guided by the Holy Spirit, that divine breath must cut through the thicket of very human passions, interests, and limitations. And on that uncertain journey, in that silent struggle between what should be and what is, between pure faith and political necessity, not only is the name of the one who will wear the invisible tiara of Peter decided, but also the path of 1 billion souls. Outside, when the white smoke finally rises, when the Habemus Papam is heard, when the chosen one appears on the central balcony, the world celebrates, laughs, and cries. But few know how profound the battle waged within those walls has been. Few understand that the election of a pope is the final act of a drama that has been unfolding in the shadows for centuries, and that will continue as long as there is a church and a world that watches her with eyes hungry for faith and mystery. And so, while the applause of the square resounds among Bernini's columns, and the bells of St. Peter's ring out announcing the election, in the halls and chambers of the Domus Sanctum Marthae, in the hidden corridors that snake behind the Sistine Chapel, the true echoes of the conclave are only just beginning to manifest themselves. Every gesture of the new pontiff will be interpreted as payment, as a symbol, as a sign of loyalty or rupture. The names that appear on the first lists of appointments are not mere whims, but coded signals that the initiated know how to read. The elevation of a progressive cardinal indicates a victory for the reformers. The confirmation of a traditionalist prefect, a nod to the old guard. The opening of new investigations into financial scandals, a clear message to those who thought that time would bury the sins of their predecessors. The secrets of the conclave don't end when the white smoke dissolves in the Roman sky. They don't end because the networks of influence woven in the shadows don't disappear, but rather adapt. They change tactics, face, strategy, but they continue to operate. The Vatican is a living organism, and like any body, it has visible veins and hidden arteries. The Roman Curia, that intricate apparatus of congregations, dicasteries, and tribunals, is not just an administrative machine. It is also a battlefield where every papal decision faces visible and invisible resistance. History remembers, for example, how Pope John XXII, initially presented as a transitional pontiff, surprised everyone by convening the Second Vatican Council, an event that radically transformed the Church in the 20th century. Behind this bold gesture lay pressure, resistance, and compromises, and also betrayals. Many of those who applauded his election later worked to halt or dilute the conciliar reforms. Thus, every pope, consciously or not, becomes a prisoner of the dynamics unleashed by his own election. In recent times, Benedict XVII's own resignation has been the subject of varied interpretations. Some maintain that it was an act of courage, a humble resignation from someone who recognized his limitations. Others see it as proof that internal forces, financial scandals, and secret reports on power struggles and corruption made his rule unsustainable. The famous Vatican report, delivered to Benedict and classified as top secret, reportedly contained such explosive revelations that the aging pope preferred to step down rather than face the storm. Likewise, the election of Francis in 2013, beyond the official narratives of renewal and mercy, was influenced by geopolitical calculations. The choice of a pope from the global south responded not only to a spiritual need to reach out to the peripheries, but also to a strategic move to reposition the Church in a multipolar world where Europe was no longer the center. Even within the conclave itself, tensions do not always disappear. There is historical evidence of cardinals who, after their election, felt marginalized, betrayed, or deceived. In the past, there were those who tried to boycott the new pontiff's first decisions, those who conspired to weaken his authority or sow doubts about his legitimacy. Although today the fisherman's ring slips smoothly onto the finger of the elected official, the iron of politics remains embedded in its circumference. The dark secrets of the conclave also inevitably include the role of the major religious orders, lay movements, and internal lobbies. Organizations such as the Jesuits, Opus Dei, the Legionaries of Christ, charismatic movements, and national episcopal conferences all have interests, visions, and strategies that seek to influence the election and the subsequent course of the pontificate. The power of these networks is not absolute, but it is not insignificant either. Many cardinals arrive at the conclave already identified as men of Opus Dei, close to the Jesuits, or allies of a particular lay movement. And these games are not only played within the Vatican. Throughout history, foreign powers have sought to influence papal elections, no longer with explicit vetoes as in the Habsburg era, but through diplomatic channels, the media, and economic pressure. Modern intelligence services, whether those of the United States, Russia, China, or European powers, consider the Vatican a strategic player. In the 21st century, a pope can mediate conflicts, influence peace processes, and influence global economic decisions. Having a friendly pope is not a matter of faith, it is a matter of state. Thus, the dark secrets of the conclave are also the secrets of the modern world. The papal election is not an act isolated from the rest of human history. It is one of its most subtle and powerful manifestations. Beneath Michelangelo's frescoes, as the cardinals place their ballots in the bronze urn, as they murmur the ritual words, as the smoke begins to rise, so too do the hopes, fears, and strategies of an entire planet that, consciously or not, continues to look to Rome for signs. The more discreet chronicles speak of how, in some conclaves, there have been tears, nervous breakdowns, veiled threats, and indecent proposals. Episodes are recounted in which senior cardinals, pushed to the limits of their physical and mental endurance, gave in to pressure they would never admit in public. Stories are told of mysteriously annulled ballots, of flawed votes, of last-minute maneuvers. Not everything can be proven. Not everything should be proven, because at its core, the conclave is also an act of faith, faith that, despite everything, divine grace will know how to extract the necessary diamond from the human mud. After the habemus papam, visible history begins. The speeches, the encyclicals, the travels, the reforms. But the invisible history, the history of secrets, continues to flow beneath the surface. Sometimes, a pope is remembered not so much for what he did, but for what he failed to do. For the battles he silently lost, for the betrayals he endured without denunciation, for the decisions imposed on him under the guise of consensus. The white smoke that heralds a new pontiff is, ultimately, also a smoke of forgetting, of selective amnesia. The world celebrates the new leader, forgetting the tensions, the pacts, the maneuvers that brought him there. but in the secret archives, in the sealed letters, in the silent testimonies of those who lived through those days, it remains recorded for those who may one day dare to look beyond the curtain of incense. Thus, each conclave is an echo of the first, of those times when the Church was born amidst persecutions and conspiracies, amidst martyrdoms and betrayals. And so it will be, as long as the world turns, and as long as the name of Christ continues to be spoken among men who, though made of clay, are also capable of being touched by the fire of the Spirit. But in that intersection of clay and fire, spirit and flesh, faith and politics, the conclave's darkest secret remains unchanged. The reminder that, in the election of each pope, human and divine history intertwine in a dance that no one has ever been able to fully unravel. And beneath this silent but brutal dance, the map is drawn of the future not only of the Church, but also of the nations that openly or surreptitiously see the Vatican as a key piece in the chessboard of global power. Because, although the conclave pretends to be isolated, it is impossible in the modern era to completely contain the pressures that come from outside. Just as medieval kings sent their covered emissaries, today ambassadors, intelligence services, corporations, and even ideological lobbies extend their invisible tentacles toward Rome. The moment the new pope appears on the balcony, he no longer only carries on his shoulders the weight of the faith of millions, but also the web of commitments, threats, and hopes that the secrets of the conclave have woven in the shadows. Few know that, in the days leading up to the election, confidential reports circulate among the cardinals like ancient relics. Discreet dossiers, delivered by hand or slipped into sealed envelopes, summarize the Holy See's financial situation, latent scandals, and emerging geopolitical threats, strategies for addressing humanitarian crises, internal reforms, and relations with hostile governments are discussed. Each cardinal arrives at the conclave not only with his or her own conscience, but also with a mental map of possible alliances, calculated risks, and future scenarios. Some, especially the most veteran, play with a coldness that would astonish any professional diplomat. And amidst this sea of conflicting interests and visions, the Holy Spirit is invoked, not as a mere formality, but as the ultimate hope that despite everything, the election is not solely the product of human intrigue. However, even the saints know that God writes straight on crooked lines, and the cardinals, men of faith, but also of the world, understand that their vote is, ultimately, a dicey gamble between the divine and the earthly. Sometimes, the elected official himself is aware of this. There are moving testimonies of popes who, after their election, wept in solitude, overwhelmed not by glory, but by the terror of responsibility. John XXII, it is said, wept on the night of his election, aware that what was coming was not honor, but sacrifice. Paul VI, that refined intellectual who navigated the post-conciliar storms, confessed in his diaries the unbearable weight of papal solitude. And Benedict XVI, in his resignation, revealed the magnitude of the spiritual and physical strain that the Petrine burden entails. In these times, where information travels at the speed of light and scandals can erupt with a single click, the election of a pope is not just a spiritual event. It's a high-stakes operation, a diplomatic maneuver of global reach. Every gesture of the new pontiff will be scrutinized down to the last detail. His nationality, his age, his theological training, his pastoral gestures, his silences, and his words. And so, in the conclave, the cardinals don't just elect a man. They elect a symbol, a message to the world. Sometimes they choose continuity, other times a break. Sometimes, as in the case of John Paul II, they choose surprise. And in every choice, the ghosts of past conclaves whisper from the shadows, reminding them that every decision is also a gamble against time, a move on the eternal board where the human and the divine are intertwined in perpetual tension. The dark secrets of the conclave, then, are not simply hidden sins or unconfessed crimes. They are the complex, painful, fascinating reality of a human act that claims to be divine. They are the implicit recognition that holiness does not eliminate cunning, that faith does not extinguish politics, that hope coexists with fear. They are proof that even in the most sacred moments, human history continues to be written in the same old letters: ambition, love, betrayal, redemption. And perhaps precisely for this reason, each papal election moves the world so much. Because in it, beneath the trappings, beneath the hymns and rituals, we recognize the eternal struggle of humankind to rise, to touch heaven, even if they still carry in their hands the clay of their origins. Because in each habemus papam, not only is a new spiritual leader born, but also the promise, imperfect, fragile, but irresistible, is renewed that it is still possible to seek the sacred amidst the din of history. Thus, every time the white smoke rises over Rome, every time a new name resounds beneath the vaults of St. Peter's, every time the people applaud, weep, or simply remain silent, deep down we all know that we have witnessed, once again, not only the election of a pope, but the eternal mystery of power, faith, and the human soul. And that, as in every conclave, the true secrets will remain hidden behind walls, whispering to the centuries to come, reminding us that holiness and darkness are, on this earth, inseparable companions on the journey.